hear a lot of clinicians asking, how do I get in there? No, you don't go behind the yellow tape. No, you don't talk to them when they're on a call. You have to do it at a different time. When you're doing EMDR or when you're doing therapy, very rarely is a call have a really nice beginning, middle, and end. I think you can't just be a therapist and take EMDR or CBT. You have to do other things. Brain fitness needs to be integral in any training, from boot camp, basic training, EMT classes. What they don't expect is when somebody doesn't get what you just went through. We're all walking around in a minefield of triggers, and we're all one event away from trauma.
Welcome to another episode of Respond to Resilience, and in this continuation of our Clinician Masterclass series, we'll be diving into the fine points of working with firefighters. Our guest is psychologist Robbie Adler-Tapia, PhD, and she's an EMDRIA approved consultant and certified therapist. She's going to guide us through the unique challenges and stresses that firefighters face in their line of work. We'll explore some key strategies and techniques therapists can use to effectively address the trauma and stress that are experienced by fire service personnel. Stay tuned for an insightful discussion. We invite you to like and subscribe: YouTube, Respond to Resilience; Facebook, Responder Wellness Inc. and Responder TV; LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and please check out our website, respondertv.com, for past episodes and guest information. We'll be right back to speak with Dr. Adler-Tapia right after this.
In this family, more of us die by our own hands than by the hazards of the job.
In this family, up to a quarter of 911 telecommunicators have symptoms of post-traumatic stress.
In this family, our mental health and wellness are in crisis,
while responders are quietly suffering.
In this family, many struggle with job-related stress,
burnout, trauma, sleep disruptions, substance abuse,
and relationship problems.
In this family, we can help the helpers.
with vital information and resources,
resilient strategies,
and success stories of overcoming the obstacles.
In this family, no one is alone.
Welcome to Respond to Resilience with co-hosts retired Lieutenant David Dashinger, Dr. Stacy Raymond, and Bonnie Rimley, LCSW, EMTB.
We'd like to welcome Dr. Adler-Tapia, a licensed psychologist who began her career as a firefighter and EMT and initially studied nursing before transitioning to psychology. She authored One Badge, One Brain, One Life, Preventative Maintenance and Brain Health Training for Emergency Responders, and she's contributed numerous chapters and articles on the subject. Her workshop, Haunted, educates therapists on supporting emergency responders. And currently, Dr. Adler-Tapia serves as an employee assistant provider for law enforcement, firefighters, and emergency responders, and is the founder and clinical director of FiRSST. As an EMDR trainer, and she's been trained by Dr. Francine Shapiro, she's delivered training since 2005 and spoken at numerous conferences, including EMDRIA, ISST-D, ERAP, and the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation. Dr. Adler-Tapia, welcome to Respond to Resilience.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today.
It's great to have you. So I'd like to start by asking you if you could just elaborate on the unique challenges and stresses that firefighters face in their line of work.
That's such a complicated question because firefighters are such a diverse population themselves. I don't think we can ever assume, no matter how long you've done it or how many clients you've worked with, and I've been in practice 40 years, that you know everything. So I think being humble and asking them, specifically, what brought you in? What made you finally decide to come in? So I think asking them what their roles are, just like I ask anybody, veterans, military, law enforcement, dispatchers, what's your role? What's the most challenging thing? And what's the event, the situation that finally kind of made you come and reach out to me? So I think being humble, being curious, and letting them tell you. So doesn't matter how much I've done. I know that there's something unique. Like I'm in love now with the Luca machine, which I had never had. And I want to go back just to use that. So just really looking at challenges, also being open to kind of their employment. What are the challenges of who they work for, where they work, and what their role is. All of those make each person uniquely different.
So before I ask my question, I just want to note for the listeners and viewers that Dr. Robbie is someone that Stacy and I have worked with over the years. She is nationally known, and we look to her for learning and advice. So we're very excited to have her here in front of you because she has a lot of wonderful things to say and a lot of information to share. So I just wanted to get that out there. And having said that, how important is cultural competence with this population?
I think it can really make or break whether your client comes back in the office, because I think if you assume that you know, or if you say something, I've heard so many horror stories of something a therapist said, which really kind of confirms that person's reason for not going to therapy. And so being mindful of that, and also challenging your own biases about what they do. And, there's so much issue now with social justice. And I think looking at, your own, and as a therapist, really checking that and being aware of how you affect, your gender, your age. My husband was laughing. He's like, yeah, now you could be everybody's mother or grandmother. So how that's changed since I started at 22. So, just owning it, that no matter how much training experience you have, you still don't have enough. And that humbleness, I think, is what helps a lot. So those are some of the unique things and the culture is so different. I can go from one station to the next station and the culture is different. Mm-hmm. So, and then if somebody changes stations or assignments, the culture is different for them. So they're constantly trying to keep up with that. So it's just always a moving target. And that humbleness is what's, I think, really so important from my perspective as a psychologist.
Robbie, can I just jump in and ask about what are some of the misperceptions? Because you said that the therapist has to be careful.
I think there's so many assumptions about what you can do and what you can't do, and recognizing there's training, there's rules, there's policies, there's employers, there's the community perception. And I think we expect all our emergency responders to be heroes, and they can't always save everybody. They're going to try their hardest and do their best, and it's going to affect them. But that expectation that somehow, just like medical doctors, that you can save everybody if you just did this. Mm-hmm. So I think we put that on them, the coulda, shoulda, wouldas, what if, which haunts them. And so that's the misperception. That the other thing is how fast you can get there. I think there's a lot of pressure on, how fast somebody can get there. You call, dispatch, and they're going to be there in a blink of an eye, and it's not that easy. I was just thinking today, something we don't talk about is going to the bathroom. Imagine waking up out of sleep and the alarms are going off and you got to get on as fast as you can, and yet you really got to go to the bathroom. How many people need to go to the bathroom when they wake up? And we don't talk about that stuff. There's humans behind those badges. So I think we need to really be humble again, and also respectful and appreciative. Because I've been in other countries where you can't call 911 and nobody comes. And that has made me even more appreciative of what people do.
Hi, my name is Dr. Kristen Weldon. I am the president and founder of the Fire Service Psychology Association, which was established in 2017. This year, we are hosting our 7th annual conference in beautiful Washington, D.C. It will be hosted by the D.C. Fire and EMS Department, as well as the DC Fire and EMS Foundation. This will be an exciting opportunity to bring fire service leaders, researchers, psychologists, and mental health professionals from all around the world to come together to help define the discipline of fire service psychology. There will be a gala on the night of the 3rd, as well as a clinician cultural competency training program on October 2nd and October 5th. We'd like you to join us for this exciting event. Please check out our website at www.firepsychology.org to learn more details. I look forward to seeing you guys in October. Take care.
When we were talking offline, previous to recording, we were getting into a little bit of the nuances, and we were learning things from you about the different types of firefighting in your part of the country, kind of in the Southwest. So I'd love you to get into a little more of like breaking down some of the different types of firefighters and fire services, fire stations, fire responses. Just right there, I think is a huge piece of all this to kind of understand, why just saying firefighter or, fire department is not sufficient.
Absolutely. And I think for me, I came from Pennsylvania, where I was from originally, where I was a volunteer firefighter and EMT. My dad still responds to calls. He built that fire station as a volunteer 65 years ago. But I think what I knew was volunteer and then some paid, so that we had joint a long time ago. So I think the assumption from TV and from what people get exposed to is they're paid, like they're hanging out, eating all the time, working out, and that's all they do until the alarms go off. But as I came out to the West Coast and worked with the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation, I got exposed to there's wildland fire, there's a BIA, BLM, U.S. Forest Service, so different. And then the cross training as well. Many of them here could be trained as fire, EMS, engineers, you name it. Some of mine are nurses as well. And some of them, we see such a diversity here. But the other thing is just being aware. We have search and rescue. But so many, I think the stats are close to 900,000 volunteer firefighters in the U.S. compared to maybe around 375,000 paid firefighters. So seeing the discrepancy in that. But I know there was a fire. I have a cabin in the forest, in the U.S. forest here in Arizona, and I know lightning hit the tree that yanked out the wires of a cabin about maybe a couple hundred yards from my cabin, and there's no paid fire. There was the neighborhood firefighters, all retired fire and retired police that have formed a fire department, and they came with shovels and used tankers, used hose lines, and they kept that fire from spreading with the help of the Blue Ridge Forest Service station that's there. So it's a whole different thing. The other thing with volunteer firefighters is most of them are dispatching from their home or their jobs. Mm-hmm. And so that's going to delay it as well. If you're working and you've got to somehow have a relationship with your employer, there's sometimes I may have to run out to put a fire out, and some of them can't. Mm-hmm. So really depending on that, and so many people don't know. They don't know what kind of services they have. They just assume they call 911 or whatever and people will be there right away. Yep. And that's not necessarily true. And I think that awareness and appreciation is so important, because we just assume it'll be there because we call. So all of those different things, the search and rescue folks that go out, we have a lot of search and rescue because we're also a border state. Mm-hmm. So as we see people out in the desert, those guys are out in the middle of nowhere. We also have the Border Patrol that have their own services as well. So all of those pieces are just making this population such a diverse population.
Robbie, can you talk about the importance of embedded clinicians, ride-alongs, ride times, stopping in your local fire department, and how critical that is for clinicians?
Absolutely. I heard a paramedic firefighter I had a teenager in my office that wanted to go to school to be a paramedic firefighter. And so he asked somebody, how do you get in? And he said, bring ice cream. Come to this station and show up with Klondike bars.
Oh, nice.
And he was talking about how to build bridges. And I think that's a thing to pay attention to, is how do you build bridges? I hear a lot of clinicians asking, how do I get in there? No, you don't go behind the yellow tape. No, you don't talk to them when they're on a call. You have to do it at a different time. And I think that's been kind of a myth, that we could go do EMDR on people when they're on a scene. And I'm like, no, you don't step behind the yellow lines. You don't, go on a fire scene and say, can I tap on you? That doesn't work. That'll get you a really kind of an X, and they'll never talk to you because it tells them you don't know what they do. So I think building those relationships, do presentations, go to advocacy things. I've served on committees, from local committees to state committees to national input. You're going to have to do some investment to build those relationships, and it's the cost of doing business. Mm-hmm. But I also think the importance of really, now it's hard to do ride-alongs, sit-alongs, fly-alongs out here because of risk management issues. And so when we're looking for people to do that, but why not take a class? You can go take a first responder class. Right now I was looking at, there's a wildland first aid class that they're offering. It's like $99. And I was thinking, I might want to go take that. It's been a long time, but I do live in the middle of nowhere, so it'd be good to get services for myself to be able to provide that to my community. So I think that's something you invest in your own training. I think you can't just be a therapist and take EMDR or CBT. You have to do other things. So Red Cross disaster mental health is really good training, I think, for people. Just looking around, what's there? What can you, bless you, sit in on to really get more knowledge? I know we're talking about fire today, but I know for me, I invested in and took the training from the Force Science training. And that was probably one of the best things I ever took to really, because I have a pink BB gun, but I've never shot a firearm. So to learn about the science behind the use of force. I also learn there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of joking between fire and PD and dispatchers, but there's also an integral process there. Ask about local lore. And when I say local lore, pretty much every department has their cases that everybody knows about that have affected people over the years. We had a shooting here, it's been 14 years ago, that really, many of the people who responded, many of the people who were on scene and responded are no longer in the field because of that event with where we lost a police officer. So learning those local lore, the local history also is important. Very rarely do we see people from all over the world, but you could have somebody reach out. We had a Canadian person who came down and lived here as a snowbird. So snowbirds here, people who come to get out of the cold and they want to come live in Arizona. So that affects our people. So that's one of the things I learned from one of the local towns. Goes from a population of 50,000 to a population of 500,000 when the snowbirds come. What a difference that requirement is for all of their emergency services. So there's so many variables that really you can't keep track of all of them. You just keep asking.
So Robbie, what are some key strategies or techniques for therapists working with firefighters that you would recommend?
Well, I'm going to plug my book here. That's why I wrote the book. I think looking at how do you get them in your office? How do you keep them in your office? Because that's the other challenge, is there's lots of reasons. My experience is majority of the time they'll come once or twice and not come back. So, it's like, okay, I just proved to my spouse, because I get that referral. It's a spouse going, the A referral, where if they don't come in, I'm leaving them. So they come in and go, hey, I went. And so I think it's looking at, just like with kids, and I'm not saying firefighters are kids, but like with anybody, what's the benefit to you to being in my office? How do you see that? So first of all, establishing, my question is, how are we going to know when we're done? What is it you want to be thinking, feeling differently than where you are now when you're ready to graduate? And so I think that really making it about what are the things that you could benefit from. So I'm going to plug my book. That's why I wrote the One Badge, One Brain, One Life book, because it's written for the client. These were all the things over the years that I was telling clients. And so I give them a copy of the book. I ask them to take it, and it's exercises so that they see the benefit of that. So I go through, what are your calls that haunt you? What are the ones in those quiet moments that come up? Would you like to sleep better? Would you like better relationships with your spouse, your kids? Do you want to reduce the amount you're drinking? And those kind of things. So making it something that they see the benefit, because I can't, if I'm the only one that sees a benefit or their spouse is the only one, they're not going to come in and get done what they need to get done.
Mm-hmm. Calling all mental health professionals, join us for the Clinician Masterclass series working with first responders and empower your practice with expert insights and actionable strategies brought to you by the Responder Resilience Podcast. This isn't your typical podcast. Dive deep on working with EMS and 911 personnel with seasoned therapists Dr. Nicole Navega and Bonnie Rumely. Sonny Prevetto shares specific knowledge and tools to support police. Dr. Stacy Raymond offers professional insights on working with veterans. Dr. Robbie Adler-Tapia covers working with firefighters in a clinical setting. And Dr. Kristen Weldon explores cultural competency and the fire service. Get ready to transform your practice. Subscribe and stream anytime on our channels, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Stay in the loop and sign up now at respondertv.com.
Robbie, what do you think are some of the common misconceptions therapists have about working with firefighters therapeutically?
You know, it's so interesting to listen to therapists. What they think is that, you know, we're going to fix them. We're going to come in there and do this magic stuff. And yes, EMDR is magic. There's no doubt. EMDR therapy can help you clear your calls. But I think being able to really understand, I think people see TV and that's all they have. That's their only understanding is what they watch on TV or YouTube. Now people are watching YouTube. But recognizing you're only seeing a slice and nobody, you know, solves a crime or puts out a fire in 45 minutes, right? You're going to be on the scene sometimes days at a time. We just had a huge fire here from an industrial building and gosh, it's 115 degrees and they've been on scene. I think it took 3 days to find the one worker that was still missing. So it's not done in 45 minutes or an hour. And then you go, the biggest misconception I think from the community and therapists is that after that call, you get a break. They don't realize you go call to call to call. So when you're doing EMDR or when you're doing therapy, very rarely does a call have a really nice beginning, middle, and end. You might have calls, and so it's more like a kaleidoscope of that parade of faces. You might not have unique pieces of one event that's its total narrative in a story. You got a piece of this one, a piece of that one. So maybe you went to a drowning, and then maybe you went to a fire, and then you went to somebody who was coding. It doesn't just have one single discrete incident. So recognizing that, especially with EMDR therapy, it's not narrative therapy. It's what's the next thing that came up and the next thing and the next thing. They don't necessarily come up about one event. It could be the whole day, the whole week, the whole shift, the whole time you were out searching for somebody and you were out there 4 days. It could be about something completely different. So, you could be on one call and another call happens at the same time. So you're on a call and somebody hits you. I've had that. I was hit from the blind side of the back of the ambulance. And so my patient is secure, but I'm in the side of the door of the ambulance that's like tipping on the roof. So we had one call, then we had another call, then we had people hitting that car. So it can be a series of events and they're not discrete. So I think that's an assumption that a lot of people make. You do one call and then you go back and you get to take a shower and maybe you get a break or you get to eat. That's not how it works. It's just one after the other after the other. So I think that's a huge assumption for people, therapists and the community. So I put therapists in the community. Unless they have some history of experience or they've invested in learning, that's what they're going to assume. And they're going to assume what they see on TV is right. Does that resonate for you guys?
Yes.
Very much, absolutely. Yeah. I was going to ask you to kind of go a little deeper into that niche that we're talking about in terms of, it might be maybe we watch too many TV shows or movies and might be thinking, a therapist might be thinking, well, it's that big call, the big fire, the big fatal accident, the big, explosion. But many times it's probably other things, or I'd love to hear your insight into some of the other things that come up that are distressing firefighters, whether it be not being able to get a call efficiently in time, a call that didn't go well, or some like really almost mundane call that you wouldn't think of as being stressful and traumatic, but really does affect the firefighter. What are your thoughts on that?
So a lot of different things came up in my mind of the work I've done, but we have a very litigious society. So everybody on a call is worried about getting to the call. And then once you get there, what do you need to do to not get sued? And I think that's constantly in the back there. And then what do you do when you, and a bigger issue, I think the most difficult is the betrayal trauma, the administrative betrayal. When I did the best I could with what I had at the time, you're going to sit, a week later with information I didn't have when I made those decisions, and then evaluate and judge me. And honestly, I think people prepare for most of what they're going to see in the line of duty. They expect that. What they don't expect is when somebody doesn't get what you just went through, or they judge you for it. One of the things I've been working with is some of the dog attacks on adults. I think we expect dog attacks on kids or bites, but when you have an adult attacked, mauled, killed by killing an adult, that's something I don't think we expect a lot. And so to imagine the trauma of that, and so now you're not only trying to get to your victim, you've got to deal with dogs. So to have your, whether it's your licensing board or your command staff or your city council, your city manager, your mayor, not have your back on that, to see, I think it's hard for people to understand the sounds, the smells, the stuff that gets in your skin that you can't get out for days, the taste. Those are all pieces of what haunts you afterwards. But that administrative and institutional betrayal, when somebody challenges your decision, and then the next level is the burden of command. If you're, and I know David, retired lieutenant, right?
Yep.
And so that burden of command, because it's not just your safety, it's making sure everybody's where they need to be and taking everybody home. And so that burden of command adds to it. And so you're constantly under a microscope. And that's difficult, to do the best you can with what you have at the time. That's one of the other things I tell people in my office, whether I'm doing debriefings or whether I'm doing EMDR therapy or crisis intervention, is just write down what you knew right now, because in a day, in 2 days, there's going to be information you didn't have when you made that decision. And that's not fair to judge yourself on information you got later.
Right. And I love that you put in the spotlight on that. I want to say that for firefighters, obviously all first responders, and particularly people in a leadership command role, the pressure of getting it right, because you really just have, many times you just have one opportunity to get it right.
Yes.
Pressure in that moment, and then afterwards when you are in a position to be judged and second guessed, and not from yourself or from peers and other leadership, that is a huge stressor, to say the least, on anybody who's in that position.
Absolutely. And some departments have note takers, right? Depending on the size of the department, there's somebody taking notes. But that person taking notes does not have the line of vision that you have. They're not right there. So they may be documenting things from a distance that's not what was going on. And so when you have that discrepancy between your recall, your short-term memory, and your note taker, and they don't match, and I'm dealing with that right now. It's the betrayal trauma. When you're the paramedic that's in there and you're up to your elbows in body tissue and blood and smells, and there's somebody back on the truck, beside the truck, document, they didn't see what you were doing exactly. And that's a scary thing that I've seen happening, is the note taker is insistent what they saw was right versus the paramedics' recall. And that has come back to haunt some of my clients, where they can't trust. And in fire service, you have to trust the people you're on the rig with, the people you're responding with. And if that person is kind of like stabbing you in the back, how are you supposed to work? So I think that personal integrity and the awareness, we're never going to have the exact same recall that the other people had. We're going to have differences in that. And that's to be expected. That's actually the norm. If we all had the exact same recall, I would say we practiced. Right. So accepting that. But I see that up through the chain of command. But even paramedics have to have their state licensure, maybe some national things. And then you have people who have never been on a call judging you. There are people in the medical profession, those medical folks who maybe were in an ER or maybe worked in a hospital, but never worked in the trenches. There's never enough hands. There's never enough time. There's never enough equipment to do what we really want to do. And we have to accept that. And honestly, I think it's getting more difficult because we're cutting budgets, we're cutting staff. We can't get people to go because they don't want to do this job. We don't pay them enough. So I could talk about that for a long time, because that's honestly some of the biggest targets for EMDR trauma processing that I work with. Not the event. They expected that. It's the aftermath of the event that they never expected.
Because I don't care how much you love this job, at some point you're not doing this job forever.
If our families are so important to us, why is the divorce rate so high?
You have to stay vigilant. You have to stay aware. The problem is, when you get home or when you're out in public, you run the risk of not being able to turn that off.
Well, I think Stacy and I would echo that. We see more betrayal trauma in our offices than people wanting to process the trauma of the job. And I think for any therapist working with first responders or looking to do that work needs to understand that this betrayal is just pervasive. And we see it in fire, police, EMS. We've seen it in every branch. And I've experienced it as an EMS person as well. When you go to some of these scenes and you're in the public and you've got 10 people out with their phone ready to video you, that kind of pressure is not something that you're trained for.
No.
And so I think understanding the amount of internal and external pressures that first responders, especially firemen, have on them on these scenes, it's absolutely incredible.
So to add to that and to reiterate what Robbie said about everyone's brain is processing it differently, right? So everyone's going to have a different perspective depending on where they're standing. But you even look at I know we're not talking about police, but police with body cams, right? The police officer may remember it one way, even though the body camera is capturing exactly from a similar angle. And because the trauma brain, when the person is in fight or flight. Robbie, you want to speak to that? When a first responder is going through fight or flight, their cortisol and adrenaline is pumping. What happens to the first responder's perception?
I can share one with you that's in my book, my own experience. I was an EMT at 16. Back then, they would let you do that, and I dispatched from home with my dad, the fire chief. And I went on a call on Thanksgiving morning, and when I dispatched, my big thing was my hair was a mess. That's what I'm focused on. I got to get a hat on because, I'm not ready for this call. And so we get out to this call. It's maybe a quarter of a mile. It's where my bus stopped. And here I have two vehicles. I have an old Scout, and if you know what I'm talking about, those old Scouts. And I have a 4-door sedan. and a rainy morning in the Northeast, and the Scout went up over the sedan, but I walk up and I have just this hyper focus. That's the other thing, is wrecking. The brain hyper focuses on threat. It doesn't see everything around. So I walk up to the vehicle. I'm the first to go. I have the Scout, the driver of the Scout's waving. He's giving me a thumbs up. He's good. I'm like, come over, we'll check him out. But I'm trying to find a driver of the car. And when I get to the car, I have a headless body and then a head sitting on the driver's seat. And I'm thinking they're messing around with me. I'm like, this is not funny. I'm looking at them. I'm like, okay, enough already. And you're joking around. And they're like, we got nothing. And then it hits me, this is real. And it hits me, this is real. And all of a sudden I have Frankenstein thoughts going through my head. We're trained. If you get a pulse, you start life-saving measures. I had a pulse. And I'm like, can you put the head back on? Am I holding the head, blowing it? Back then you did breaths and compressions. Like, I don't remember any blood, but then I'm watching from above, and you can have those out-of-body experiences because it was such a shocker. I was not prepared. I mean, in all the calls I went to see a decapitation. And so talking about that and looking at what your brain does, and, it floods to protect you. It goes in on threat. The next thing I remember is seeing somebody making a beeline to the car, and it turns out that's the spouse of the person I have in the car, and he's the fire chief from the next station over. So I'm yelling, stop him. I don't want anybody to see this. And it takes 4 firefighters to tackle him to keep him from coming up. And so I remember out-of-body experience, and I don't remember the calls we went on the rest of the day. Fortunately, the driver of the rig I was on is saying we went on calls all day long. I don't remember any of them. Now, that was a long time ago, but I have that very vivid pictures. And I think, you're there, you're not only, you can be in shock about what you see, but you also have to have your head on a swivel because you're watching, because they don't have traffic stopped yet. I'm watching to make sure we don't get hit again. We're at an intersection. We have people coming from all 4 directions. It's Thanksgiving. Everybody wants to get where they want to go. It's raining. So you've got that, your own self-preservation. So that it's with the brain, and Daniel Amen's work, which I love, and he gave me permission to include those pictures in my book, is looking what your brain does in the line of duty. And you have to be on hyper vigilant, hyper alert. You're talking about your patient, yourself, you might have other firefighters. We've had them have strokes and heart attacks when we're on a scene. So we've got a lot going on. Plus, we're watching for the community. Fortunately for me, at that time, we didn't have phones, because I think that would have been a major, people would have come from all directions to videotape it.
Right.
So that piece of it is recognizing we train first responders to use depersonalization and derealization, which means it's not about me and it's not real. I'm going through the motions that I've been trained to do. And there's the expectation that you're just going to be a machine and you're going to do what you're trained to do, and it's not going to affect you. But there's a person behind there. There's a heart, there's a soul, there's a compassion, because you wouldn't do it for the money. You do it for the love of helping people. And you can be affected no matter how long you've been on, no matter what you've done, you can always be affected. And it can touch you in different ways. Like if I see a lot of folks who just had their first child, these rookie firefighters, dispatchers, and then they get a kid call. I don't think anybody's immune to a kid call. I don't care how long you've been on duty. So the kid calls, and kid calls aren't necessarily ones that we look at as traumatic, but they should be the number one thing we look at as traumatic. Kid calls, things that resonate in our personal life. So that brain, the brain focuses on threat. The other thing the brain does, though, and I learned this from a colleague, it's called dispatch priming. What you get dispatched to on the way to a call, your brain is running scenarios. What if you get on the scene and it doesn't match what you were running?
Right.
so that it's not even trauma brain, it's dispatch brain. Right? How many times has what you've been dispatched to not match what you find? I got dispatched to like a fender bender. Right? Exactly. And dispatch can only do what they can do. I mean, they're taking information a lot of times from traumatized people. They're trying to glean information to tell us like what to expect, but it's rarely.
Right.
They can't possibly capture. There's no cameras. It's not like Australia where they got cameras everywhere, right? So I think that dispatch priming too, it's not even trauma brain. It's what we are trained to listen, and dispatches, and there's information we're getting on the way there, right?
Yep.
It's loud. We got sirens going. We're trying to hold on. And then we're getting more information, and the communication, making sure that everybody coming on the scene has the same information. And that rarely happens too, because you come in from different directions. And I had one engine coming from the west. I had one engine coming from the east. I'm in the middle with the vehicles. The guys coming in from the east saw a scout and a guy waving. The guys coming in from the west saw all of us running around. I wasn't running around, but they're running and tackling the guy. They had completely different information when they came on the scene. So even that trauma brain thing, even before that, it's really looking at what does your brain focus on based on dispatch, your assignment, your experience as well. And from when you have experience, you start to like predict what you're going to have to do based on your training and experience. And hopefully many times that works. And when it works like it's supposed to, and you get a save and you get a house fire out and you save the dogs and the cats and the kids, but when it doesn't turn out the way expected, or when you have people you can't save, or you smell burns, right? That smell is something that you can't help somebody understand. That the smell of burning flesh is and I do EMDR on the parade of faces of the smells, not just what you saw, but what you smell, what you heard.
Right.
So I'm kind of talking a lot, Stacey. I'm not sure if
that's okay. No, you're hitting so many good points. So many good points. It sounds to me like emotional and mental whiplash.
That's a good way to put it, I think.
Yeah, and that's harsh.
Yes.
Oh, it was, and honestly, for me, that experience, even though it was a long time ago, was huge as a foundation. I also think that for science class, you had asked about body cams. That's where I learned about body cams. And I also learned what we call cognitive interweaves with EMDR. I have so many incredible cognitive interweaves from taking that for science certification. I had to get permission. I think I was the only psychologist in the class. I think there were 75 people. But I learned so much, and I learned to ask questions about the body cam. It's a camera. It takes rapid fire pictures and puts them together. But I've watched videos where the camera missed. So there's some good stuff. If you can't take the class and you don't have the experience, look at some of the videos on YouTube that are actual videos of training, where there's one where they asked you, how many rounds do you hear?
Yeah.
Right? And when they slow it down, there's 6, but when you listen to it, there's 3. So you want to know, first of all, the body cam stuff, and I'm not an expert, but this is some of the basic stuff I learned, was where was the camera? Was it on your chest? Was it on your glasses? There's a distortion just about where you wear the body cam on your body. So taking those classes, learning that, it's also frames per second. How many frames per second, right? And learning how much the human brain can take in, as we're trying to get that information. So we're more like a video, taking in smells, sounds, thoughts, internal, external triggers, data, but the camera's just taking pictures.
Right. And the brain in the state of trauma and fight or flight, it goes into audio exclusion, right? So the officer thought he heard 3 shots, but there were actually 6 shots. There's auditory exclusion, and then there's tunnel vision.
Absolutely.
And, all first responders have tunnel vision, so they're not going to see accept what's really right in front of them, because they're in survival brain.
And sometimes what they see isn't like sometimes they have an out-of-body experience. And that's where what I use that example of my decap case was all of a sudden I was looking at it from above, right? And so the angle shifted. I didn't realize that till later. But and then you have that in your memory networks. That can get triggered at any time at a later point in time. So for me, my decap didn't come up. I came to Arizona. I went to graduate school to get my doctorate in counseling psych. But the day I went to defend my dissertation, I had massive panic attacks, and my thought was, I'm going to die. And I'm married to a psychologist, and he was very helpful. He says, that's stupid. You know, you're already passed. So there's the empathy I got from living with a psychologist.
That's so sweet.
Yeah, it was totally helpful. Yeah. He's like, that's dumb. But what I realized later, and so after I defended my dissertation, I wouldn't even get in a car. I walked home, and I couldn't figure out until later I realized my decap call. She had just defended her dissertation, and she had 2 little boys the same age as my little boys. My brain, 13 years apart, put that together and said, you're going to die when you defend your dissertation.
Right. Interesting.
So it's not, I think there's an assumption too that it's going to get triggered, like whatever happened was going to just happen yesterday or last week. This was 13 years apart. This was the East Coast to West. It was in my data bank.
Right.
And it didn't come up until in a similar situation. That's the other thing. You can get triggered by anything similar to what you went on. It doesn't have to be the exact same thing.
Right.
So the brain is generalizing to anything that's threatening. And so you never know what's going to trigger you. We're all walking around in a minefield of triggers.
Yes.
And we're all one event away from trauma.
If you're living with stomach pain and struggling to lose weight, I can empathize, because for the first half of my life, I did as well. But I found the science-based strategy that helped me lose and keep 80 pounds off, and it's what I have right here. My team and I created the Balance Box as a way for you to achieve balanced, holistic health and give back to others all at the same time. So that science-based strategy I mentioned, super simple. Balance the pH of your body for maximum nutrient absorption. Balance your gut-brain connection. Get good sleep every night and feel a sense of purpose. It is scientifically proven that when we feel a sense of purpose, we have less cortisol pumping through our veins, and it improves our mental wellness. So that's what the box does. What's inside? You get a bottle of our supplement ENSzyme. That's our plant-based digestive formula, a pH test kit that's good for 1,000 tests, REM sleep from our partner Healthy Cell, and the best part about this box is a portion of every fee goes to our growing mission, the Influencers of Kindness, which you are now a part of. You are helping us feed and clothe our homeless veterans and brothers and sisters. So check us out online at thebalancebox.lifestyle. You can try us risk-free. We will honor a full refund in 45 days if you're not happy. And join us at the lifestyle movement that's changing the world.
We need to change the culture within departments as well. That there's actually people who think they're immune to this. And you're not. It could happen to you at any time, but until it happens to you, I think we train people to minimize it and think it's only be the weak ones, or it's only the ones that can't hack it, versus going, this could happen to anybody at any time.
All right. Or just have another drink. I think that's a big coping mechanism among fire. Right?
Absolutely.
Well, that's what we did. I date myself, and David, maybe you know this, but we did choir practice. I have a bunch of rookies who don't know what choir practice is.
No, I mean, there was a time when there was a bar in every firehouse, right?
Yeah.
That was part of the structure of the building. That was like the center of the activity.
And while you cleaned up, and while you were cleaning up, you had a beer, right? Or you had a drink.
Yeah, it's like liquid therapy.
Yeah. Well, liquid courage too sometimes.
Liquid courage.
Right? And that's because we didn't train, we didn't look at what was happening to our brains. And that's why I really want to focus on brain fitness, not mental illness. And so I get really upset when they call it mental illness.
Yeah.
We need to look at brain fitness and brain injuries.
Yeah.
It's going to happen. And it's the last thing we prepare you for, but the most important thing in the line of duty is your brain. How do we take care of your brain in the line of duty? Do you even know what's happening in your brain?
I love that awareness piece. And as we wrap up, just want to kind of open it up to you for anything that we didn't talk about that you think is pertinent to include before we finish.
I honestly think at all levels of our society, we need to understand what's happening to your brain on a daily basis. We need to look at the data you're collecting, which is unique to every one of us. We also need to look at the fact that brain fitness needs to be integral in any training, from boot camp, basic training, EMT classes. We need to have brain fitness. And we need to stop talking about mental illness. We used to burn people who were schizophrenic at the stake because we thought they were witches. We know better now, right? We know that there's a brain issue going on. And so you've got tissue and neurochemistry and neuroelectricity in your brain. And when you run too hard, too fast, too long, you wear out that neurochemistry. It cannot keep up with demand. We also don't talk about brain injuries. And so we don't talk about the effects of shift work and sleep issues. So I think that we have to look at the demands of the career, and then you add media and cameras on the scene, like Bonnie said. It's a different career, and it's changing all the time. And then you have the litigious piece of it and the people who judge you without any awareness or training. So I think we need to look at our training. We need to have brain fitness training from the day you get hired through your career, because we know that your brain fitness gives you better decision making, keeps you healthier. We know the number one killer of firefighters is cardiac crisis. And so, but there's a combination of post-traumatic injury and hypertension. Yeah. But we get episodic hypertension. We don't get the typical hypertension. So your heart wears out. But those go together. We can't separate your brain from your heart, from your joints, right? We have to look at the whole person. So for me, if anybody's listening, get this training right away. Get it to all your people. You will reduce your risk exposure. You will improve hiring and retention of your people. And you need to keep doing it. I understand some people don't like the CISM debriefings. I think that when they're done by experts and they're done well away from your station, they make a huge difference. I'm going to put that out there. I also have a huge respect for peer support. We need to make sure peer support are people who've been through hell and back themselves. So we talk about the way to know where you're going is talk to those coming back. You might learn from other people you work with about calls and about techniques and strategies, but you don't learn to talk about what haunts you and how you are working with that. So you can tell I'm pretty adamant about it. I'm pretty feisty when it comes to that, because we do not need to see post-traumatic injuries on first responders if we do deploy it correctly. And I just don't understand the barriers. I sit on so many committees. It's not a financial barrier, because honestly, to get somebody out on the road, I think it's $250,000 to $750,000 training dollars on one employee. So you should take care of them and keep them as long as you can. But if you're not doing brain fitness and line of duty, you will lose your best people, because they're the hard hitters. They're the ones that go in and they take the toughest calls because they think they can protect other people. But inevitably, something's going to take you out. And if we did it right, we did it with current knowledge about the brain, this wouldn't be happening. So I want to retire, and I want to see this done better.
I wanted to just ask you one more thing, Robbie. For the therapists listening who are really interested in working with this population, what would you say to them?
Well, obviously, I'm biased. That's why I wrote this haunted class. It's to try to give people some experience. When we do it, and Bonnie knows, I ask first responders to come in and tell therapists what they wish they knew and what would help them. Because I think, so we usually bring them in for lunch or have somebody speak. If not, I have videos of people, what should therapists know. And so I think really being humble, I don't care if you have a PhD or how long you've been practicing, you can learn something from a rookie all the time. So take the class, read the book, take it for science, and ask. be humble and ask, because there's always something new.
Well, fantastic. Thank you for all of that. And we'll just kind of go around, Stacy and Bonnie, any final thoughts?
I'd just like to reiterate that brain health, as you pointed out, Robbie, how important that is. And I really hope people listen to what you said about that throughout the career. Brain health throughout the career.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I can't understate how incredible the information you just shared was, and how little that we scratched the surface of what we could talk about. But thank you for everything you've brought to us for this discussion, and hopefully we can have a subsequent one where we can get even deeper and further into it. But I think we really nailed the topic here, which was to kind of give some background and foundation to clinicians who want to understand the first responder, particularly the firefighter profession. So thank you so much for being here and sharing your time with us today.
Thank you for having me and giving me the forum to get this out there every way we can. I also think just to add one thing is, what do first responders need to know about therapists? Right? I'm not a shrink. I can't get in your head. I don't have x-ray vision, right? So I think we need to go both ways to understand we're just humans trying to help. And so we have a lot more in common than you think. I'm not trying to shrink your head. I don't know how to do that. So
thank you, Robbie.
Yeah.
Sure thing. Good to see all of you.
You too.
Please like and subscribe. YouTube, Responder Resilience, Facebook, Responder Wellness Inc., and Responder TV. We're on LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. And please go to our website, respondertv.com, for past episodes and guest information. Until the next time, stay safe, be kind to yourself. Take care.
Thank you.